Good morning. I would like to call the Joint Subcommittee on K-12 Higher Ed and CIP to order. Welcome to everyone for joining us in the committee room here in Carson City, in Las Vegas, and online. I am Senator Marilyn Dondero Loop, and I'll be chairing the Joint Subcommittee today. Will the Secretary please call the roll?
Assemblymember Hadegi. Here. Assemblymember Hafen. Here. Assemblymember Koenig. Here. Assemblymember Monroe Moreno. Here. Assemblymember O'Neill. Here. Assemblymember Torres Fawcett. Here. Assemblymember Yeager. Here. Senator Buck. Here. Senator Canizaro. Here. Senator Neal. Here. Senator Stone. Here. Assemblymember Backus. Present. Chair Dondero Loop.
And I believe we are all here, so thank you very much. Before we move on to today's closings, I would like to go over standard housekeeping. Please remember to turn off or mute your electronic devices. And for those providing testimony, please make sure that you state and spell your name and give a business card to the secretary if you have one, please. Lastly, there will be public comment at the end of our meeting today. So we'll do that, and I will give you the number later when we do that. Today, we will be following up on the K-12 education funding recommendations made by the subcommittee yesterday. Fiscal staff has taken all the subcommittee's recommendations related to K-12 education funding and plugged them into the pupil-centered funding plan model. Today, they'll be sharing with the subcommittee the results of that effort. And Mr. Malone is going to take the lead here. So please, when you're ready, Mr. Malone, boy, that was hard. Mr. Malone, please go ahead when you're ready.
Good morning, Madam Chair. James Malone, LCB Fiscal for the record. I'll be walking the subcommittee through today's closings. The Education Stabilization Account and the Pupil-Centered Funding Plan account. These were both heard yesterday and partially closed. As indicated by the chair, the fiscal staff had taken the recommendations from the subcommittee yesterday, updated the pupil-centered funding plan, and brought the results of those recommendations for discussion today. The first budget account begins on page 3 of our closing packet. This is the Department of Education's Education Stabilization Account, 203-2608. Fiscal staff recommends that this budget be closed consistent with the subcommittee's actions taken within the pupil-centered funding plan budget account over the 2025-27 biennium and the subcommittee's recommendations during the May 7th, 2025 budget closing for fiscal year 2025.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions on this particular budget? Assemblymember Backus, please.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair, and I thank our staff for all the work that they did in putting the materials together yesterday, as well as tightening everything else up on Appendix E. But obviously, there's been a lot of questions raised since yesterday, and so I just kind of wanted staff, and I hope you don't mind if I kind of walk through our understanding, specifically focusing on state special education program funding. And I guess the best way for me to kind of walk through my question would be to be looking at Appendix B, page 58 from yesterday's materials. Because there's been concerns in the decrease in average per pupil amounts for certain of our school districts as well as our charter schools. And I just want to make sure that I understand how the funding formula works, and also as presented in governor recommendation, is that we have the total funding that each of the school districts, our charter schools and university school receives is premised based on base funding from the prior year that then is now being increased by a 2% roll-up. And the committee yesterday agreed to allocate the 2% roll-up throughout each of our school districts and our charter schools. And so one of the concerns was there's a decrease. And when I'm looking at the charter school figures, the total projected special education enrollment on Appendix B from the prior fiscal year, or this fiscal year we're sitting in right now, fiscal year 2025, they had enrolled 5,892 students, but there's a projected enrollment increase for fiscal year 2026 to about 7,000. And so the formula works out that it's only a 2% roll up. And so when I'm looking at this, they get the 2% plus their base with the 12,000, not 12,000, the 1,200 extra students. Is that what kind of makes the average per pupil dollar amount go down?
Thank you for the question through you, Madam Chair, to Chair Backus. That is correct. The 2% roll-up and the recommendation that was made by the subcommittee yesterday provides, which is consistent with prior practice of past legislative sessions, that a 2% roll-up be applied to the base amount for each local education agency. In this event, because of the increased enrollment for the state public charter schools, or all charter schools, to 7,007, the effective multiplier for them is reduced to 0.39. And I hope that clarifies your question.
It does, Mr. Malone. I appreciate that clarity. And right now, looking at other school districts, I couldn't help but think, just how Nevada law works with respect to even the 13% cap of total enrollment. Our charter schools, we're not seeing that cap get hit just yet. But when I look at school districts like Humboldt, for example, they have 584 projected students who will have an IEP, but Nevada law provides a 13% cap that kind of pushes them down to only 411 kids, looking at being included for the special education enrollment count that would go to the weighted amount for special ed. And I'm seeing, and I can see where everyone's having some struggles. We've gotten some emails, we've had some public comment. In my heart, I kind of think maybe this is something down the road over the interim that we later ask our Commission on School Funding to look at, because just how the formula has traditionally worked, it looks like those amounts are kind of fluctuating just on those weights. And we're seeing it dramatically because the charter schools had that 1,200 student increase. But that's all I just kind of wanted to say. Staff, you don't have to, there's no question there. I just kind of wanted to just make this comment that this may be something we need to look at in light of information coming forward, but just noting that that 2% roll-up was really to help out each of our school districts, because everyone starts at base. Everyone does have students in special education. You look at the total amount, while our charter schools aren't subject to that 13% cap, we do have other school districts that our total population in the projected special education enrollment is 67,000, and due to the 13% cap applied to various school districts, that number goes down to 59,000. So it looks like something that could be worth exploring during the interim, and that's all I'm going to say. I thank you, Chair, for my opportunity.
Thank you very much. Are there any other questions? Seeing none, I'll accept a motion.
Madam Chair, I would so move as state, I guess it's been a bit, I would move to close the budget consistent with the subcommittee's actions taken within the pupil-centered funding plan budget account over the 2025-27 biennium and the subcommittee's recommendations during the May 7th, 2025 budget closing for fiscal year 2025.
Thank you very much. I'll take a second. Thank you very much. And Assembly Member Backus for the first, and second from Senator Canizero. Any discussion? Yes, Senator Buck.
Thank you, Chair Dunderloop and Chair Backus. I'll be voting no today.
Thank you very much. All right, with that, all those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say nay. Nay, would you mind raising your hand just so we have an accurate record? Senator Stone, Senator Buck, I think that's it. Okay, thank you very much. Motion passes. Mr. Malone? And just to clarify, that was account number 2608, the Education Stabilization Account. And now we will move on to the Pupil-Centered Funding Plan account. Mr. Malone.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Again, James Malone, LCB Fiscal for the record. The next budget on the agenda today is the Pupil-Centered Funding Plan account 203-2609. Based on updated pupil-centered funding plan model reflecting changes recommended by the subcommittee during the May 7th, 2025 budget closing, $115.7 million in additional funding would be required over the 2025-27 biennium to meet the subcommittee's intent to maintain the governor's recommended as amended statewide base per pupil amount of $9,416 in fiscal year 2026 and $9,486 in fiscal year 2027. And Chair, before we move on to the decision box here on page 5, I would like to take this opportunity to walk the subcommittee through the appendixes that provide an overview of the changes to the model for the pupil-centered funding plan. The first change is Appendix A, or the first change, the first table. My apologies. It's Appendix A, and it begins on page 7. And this provides an overview of the funding when compared to the legislatively approved budget for the biennium, the governor's recommended budget as amended, and then the updated amounts based on the recommendations that came out of the subcommittee yesterday. I would note that the general fund appropriations in the governor recommended budget as amended excludes the salary adjustment tier general fund appropriations, as the subcommittee had recommended that that program be moved into the the other state education budgets account 2699 within the Nevada Department of Education. Moving over into the May 2025 update column, there is a new row called additional funding. Based on the updated model, additional $58.8 million and $56.9 million in fiscal year 2027 for a total of $115.7 million would be required to reach the governor's recommended budget. In total, with this increase in funding on the far right, without considering the net proceeds of minerals, total revenues in the state education fund as compared to the governor's recommended budget as amended is reduced by $38 million. When considering the net proceeds of minerals, this is reduced to $47.2 million for the biennium. Moving on to the next appendix, which begins on page 8. This is Appendix B. And this provides a table comparison of the calculation for the statewide base per pupil amount as legislatively approved for the last biennium, as recommended by the governor, as amended, and based off the model, based off the recommendations made by the subcommittee yesterday. I will note here that the final statewide base per pupil amount is equivalent to the governor's recommended as amended amount of $9,416 in fiscal year 2026 and $9,486 in fiscal year 2027. Okay. On page 9, Appendix C, this provides a high-level overview of total weighted category funding for the English learner, at-risk, and GATE weighted categories and the per pupil amounts as compared to the governor's recommended budget as amended and the updated model based off the subcommittee's recommendations yesterday. The key takeaway here and consistent with the recommendations is that the English learner weight is maintained at 0.45, the at-risk is maintained at 0.35, and the gifted and talented weight is at 0.12, which is consistent with the governor's recommended budget as amended. Moving on to Appendix D on page 10. This provides an overview for all the local education agencies, with all charter schools being rolled up into the charter school category for the adjusted base per pupil amount, the weighted funding categories, and the tiered funding categories for transportation, food services, and local special education for fiscal year 2026 and fiscal year 2027 in the updated model based off the subcommittee's recommendations yesterday. And I'll talk a little bit about more of these numbers in the next appendix, which is that long sheet that you have, Appendix E, which provides the same information that is in Appendix A for the updated model, but also compares it to the previous legislatively approved model for last biennium, and then the governor's recommended as amended model for the next biennium. And there on the far right, at the very bottom, we have a change in information based off the subcommittee's recommendations from yesterday. And the first one being projected enrollment decreased by 2,175 in both years of the biennium based off the updated fiscal year 2025 forecast that was provided by the Department of Education and recommended by the subcommittee. Total projected adjusted base per pupil funding decreases when compared to the governor's recommended budget by $28.1 million. And there are associated increases in weighted funding and auxiliary funding and local special education funding for a total reduction for fiscal year 2026 of $23.7 million in funding. I would note that the increases in weighted funding and the auxiliary and local special education funding is due to the subcommittee's recommendation to provide this funding to the fiscal year 2020 baseline school districts. And moving on to fiscal year 2027, total projected adjusted base per pupil funding is a reduction of $27.9 million with various increases in weighted auxiliary and local special education funding for a total decrease of $23.5 million for fiscal year 2027. Okay. Oh, I lost my decision box. Hold on, I'm moving on. Okay. All right, so that concludes the overview of the updated tables for the model itself. Moving on to the decision box on page 5, as previously noted, in order to meet the subcommittee's intent, an additional $115.7 million in additional funding would be required. So regarding how to provide additional funding for the pupil-centered funding plan, does the subcommittee wish to recommend approval of A, $115.7 million in general fund appropriations over the 2025-27 biennium to the pupil-centered funding plan, or B, $115.7 million in education stabilization account transfers over the 25-27 biennium to the pupil-centered funding plan, or C, legislation to increase state education fund revenues by $115.7 million over the biennium for the pupil-centered funding plan, or D, a combination of options A, B, and or C totaling $115.7 million in additional revenues for the pupil-centered funding plan over the 2025-27 biennium. Fiscal staff requests authority to make technical adjustments as necessary and to transfer general fund appropriations and or education stabilization account transfers between the fiscal years of the 2025-27 biennium.
Any questions? Seeing none, I'll accept a motion.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would move to approve B, allocating the $115.7 million in education stabilization account transfer over the next biennium to the pupil-centered funding plan, and also to provide fiscal staff with authority to make technical adjustments as necessary and to transfer general fund appropriations and or education stabilization account transfers between the fiscal years of the 2025-27 biennium.
Thank you very much. Any questions? Oh, sorry. Thank you, Assemblymember Backus. Second from Senator Canizero. Now, any questions? All right, seeing none. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay. Nay from Senator Buck. Thank you very much. Motion passes. And I believe that's it. Thank you, Mr. Malone. Oh, we have one more. Oh, boy. I'm trying to make us move faster than we need to. I'm sorry, Mr. Malone. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. There are two other items relating to language in the 2025 K-12 education bill. Fiscal staff recommends that other closing item 1 be closed to provide authority to transfer general fund appropriations for the pupil-centered funding plan account between fiscal years of the 2025-27 biennium with the approval of the governor upon the recommendation of the director of the governor's finance office, with the understanding that an advance and permanent transfer, if applicable, from the education stabilization account be used prior to general fund transfers between fiscal years if needed. Additionally, fiscal staff recommends that any general fund appropriation transfers from fiscal year 2027 to fiscal year 2026 be amended once fiscal year 2026 closes to reflect the legislatively approved appropriations or as reasonably similar as possible. Once the NDE can determine whether that transfer needed to occur in whole or in part based on actual revenue collections and expenditures. In addition, fiscal staff recommends that other closing item 2 be closed with the inclusion of additional language in the 2025 K-12 education funding bill prescribing the grad score as the identifier for at-risk pupils unless the State Board of Education adopts a regulation contrary to the grad score.
Okay, any questions? I'll accept a motion.
Madam Chair, I'd move as stated by staff.
Thank you, Assemblymember Bacchus, second from Senator Canizero. Now any questions? Not seeing any? All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say nay. Motion carries. Thank you very much. And now I can thank Mr. Malone. All right, with that, we will go on to our last item for the day, and that is public comment. For those of you that are calling in, the number is 888-475-4499. When prompted, the meeting ID is 871-3392-5571, and then press pound, and when prompted for the participant ID, please press pound. And with that, we'll start here in Carson City. Is there anyone here in Carson City that would like to make public comment? Seeing none, I don't see anyone in Las Vegas. We'll go to the phone lines. ABH, when you're ready.
Thank you. If you would like to provide public comment today, please press star 9 or raise hand in the Zoom app to take your place in the queue. There are no callers wishing to provide public comment at this time.
Thank you very much. And with that, that completes our agenda for today. I would really like, this is our last meeting of the K-12 Subcommittee, so I would really like to thank staff over and over again for all your hard work and all your expertise in helping us through this process. And so with that, I will close the Subcommittee on K-12 Higher Ed and CIP for the 2025 session. Thank you.